Welcome to another episode of Scottish Murders, where I'll be telling you about the murder of 16-year-old Diane Graham. I came across the murder of Diane Graham when I was reading the Law Killers book by Alexander MacGregor, but I also used articles from the Sunday Post and the Scotsman from the 7th, 8th and 9th of March, 23rd of April and the 6th of June 1971. Diane's murder was solved pretty quickly, so it is only a short story, plus there is very little information about Diane. However, what caught my attention was that in the Law Killers book, the author stated that the DCI working on the murder inquiry admitted later that he felt considerable compassion for Diane's murderer, and from what was written in the Law Killers book, I could kind of see where he was coming from. However, when I did a bit more research and found articles from the time from the British newspaper archives, it made me question not only why a lot of details had been missing from the Law Killers book, but also why the DCI felt considerable compassion for Diane's murderer and not Diane after what he had done to her. That was just my thinking, but I'd love to know what you think after you've listened to this week's episode. So let's get started. "16-year-old Diane Moira Graham lived with her mum, Moira, and her stepdad, Alexander, in a multi-storey block of flats at Pitalpin Court, Cooper Angus Road in Dundee. Dundee is the fourth largest city in Scotland and lies, according to Wikipedia, within the eastern central lowlands on the north bank of the Firth of Tay, and is about an hour-and-a-half drive north-east of Edinburgh. The Graham family had moved into the block of flats 7 years earlier, when Moira had married Alexander, and Alexander had soon after adopted the then 9-year-old Diane, as well as changing her surname to Graham too, with a friend of the family saying that they were a happy family and that Diane was devoted to her mother. The Graham family's life passed with little incident, with Moira working in the NCR factory, which was one of the biggest employers in Dundee, Alexander working as an engineer for the General Post Office, and Diane attending Rockwell Secondary School until 1970 when she turned 16. As her adopted father worked for the post office, he was able to secure Diane a job as a telephonist at the post office after Diane left school, which Diane enjoyed. By Friday, the 5th of March 1971, Diane had been enjoying life all the more for almost 2 months, as General Post Office telephonists had been on strike since the 20th of January, meaning Diane had been thoroughly enjoying having lie-ins and lazy days for most of the time, other than when she had to take her turn at the picket line. An agreement had eventually been reached, however, and the strikers, including Diane, were due to start back at work on Monday the 8th of March 1971. So Diane intended to make the most of her last Friday night before she had to start back at work again on the Monday. And so she donned a red mini dress and knee-length black shiny boots and made her way to the JM Ballroom in Dundee city centre, where she met her friends and danced the night away, something she did every Friday night. Diane's body was found on Saturday the 6th of March at 5:30 a.m. on the ground floor laundrette area of her multi-storey block of flats at Pitalpin Court by 2 women who, before going to work as cleaners at Dundee University, had first gone to use the laundry, one of which was the Graham family's next-door neighbour. Moira and Alexander, who assumed that Diane had come home after they had gone to bed and was safe and sound in her bedroom, first knew about their daughter not making it home when their next-door neighbour who had found Diane's body came to their door and told them, shortly after Diane's body had been found. According to an article in the Scotsman on the 6th of March, within minutes of Diane's body being discovered, teams of CID men, not women, remembering this is back in 1971, the Scottish Crime Squad and tracker dogs arrived in the area, and that all CID leave that day had been cancelled. And for all that it had been less than 12 hours since Diane's body had been found, the lead detective, Detective Superintendent William Melville, who was head of Dundee CID, disclosed that they already had a significant amount of information and leads, and that the public response to their appeals for information, door-to-door inquiries, and from police approaching people in the streets and showing them Diane's photograph had been immense, with many people also calling at the mobile police unit that was at the scene of the murder to give information. The police were, however, still appealing for more information. But first, what information did they have? Well, the detective superintendent disclosed Diane had been seen travelling on a bus that left the JM ballroom at 1 a.m. and headed to the Lochee district of Dundee, and that all passengers on this number 2 bus had been traced, including a male youth who had been at the JM ballroom along with Diane and had been on the same bus home with her. He also advised that everyone who had been at the ballroom on the Friday night had also been traced and questioned. He revealed that Diane's knee-high black boots, described as having a hard shoe type with soft stocking leggings and an ornamental buckle on the sides, were missing, along with her shoulder-type handbag, which was black or navy plastic. The information police were still appealing for was in connection with tracing the owner of a car or van with side windows that had been in Lansdowne Gardens, a street just off Pitalpin Court, between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on the morning Diane was murdered. They were also appealing for the person who had been picked up by a taxi driver in Cooper Angus Road outside a particular hotel at 2 a.m. the morning Diane had been murdered to also come forward. Cooper Angus Road leads off the Lansdowne Gardens Road and was a road Diane would have walked along as she headed home from the bus, which would have been no more than a few minutes' walk. An appeal was also being made for people to come forward if they'd seen a youth travelling on foot from the area in which Diane was murdered into Clement Park Road, a street about a 9-minute walk away from where Diane lived, in the early hours of the morning Diane was murdered. And police were also keen to speak to a man who had been seen walking near lockups to the north of Pitalpin Court between 1:45 and 2 a.m, again on the morning Diane was murdered. It was still early days into the murder inquiry, and police were still looking for that one bit of information that would lead them to Diane's murderer. But so far their investigation wasn't leading anywhere. Apparently no one in Pitalpin Court had heard or seen anything suspicious, although the Law Killer's book did report that a girl in another block of flats nearby heard her scream about 1:45 a.m, but had not investigated, so couldn't give any more information. Police didn't know it yet, but by Sunday, just over a day after Diane's body had been found, a 17-year-old youth would be arrested and charged with her murder. But this youth wouldn't be found through any of the police's efforts. But before I get to that, I'm going to tell you first what the Law Killer's book says about how Diane was murdered, and at the end of the story I'll tell you what was said in the newspapers at the time. According to the Law Killer's book, Diane had been strangled with a ligature and her naked body bore the marks of match burns. Diane's red dress lay beside her, but her knee-length black boots and her shoulder bag were missing. Now, the book does go on to tell you a wee bit more about the circumstances around Diane's death after her murderer is arrested and charged, and I'll tell you about that soon. So it seems that Diane had made the 28-minute bus journey home after leaving the JM ballroom with no problems. She appeared to have made it from where the bus had dropped her off and made the short walk to her block of flats, and only then had she been murdered. So who had strangled, stripped and burned 16-year-old Diane, and why? Well, his name was James Mulliday. He was 17 years old and he lived in King's Cross Place, about a 20-minute walk away from where Diane lived and where her body was found, with him having to walk along roads such as Clement Park Road and Lansdowne Gardens Road after leaving Pitalpin Court. It was after he had read the many articles that were being printed about Diane's murder, along with her photo, that on the Sunday, just over a day after he had murdered Diane, he made his way to the mobile police unit parked up Pitalpin Court, walked inside, and calmly said to Detective Chief Inspector David Fotheringham, again according to the Law Killer's book, "I'm the guy you are looking for. I was on the bus with her." Now, I'm not sure if this James Mulliday had already been spoken to by police, as it was reported that they had traced and spoken to everyone who had been on the bus with Diane and at the ballroom that night, or whether they hadn't realised that this James Mulliday had even been on the same bus as Diane. That bit isn't clear. What is clear, though, is what Chief Inspector Fotheringham thought about Diane's killer when, according to the Law Killer's book, he'd spent a short amount of time with him at the main police station, where Diane's killer appeared happy to disclose what had taken place the night he murdered Diane. The Chief Inspector found him to be inoffensive and friendly. Initially, James Mulliday didn't confess to actually murdering Diane. He said that he had been on the same bus as Diane on the Saturday morning after also being at the JM ballroom, and that they both got off at the same stop. He said he then caught up with Diane and they walked together, talking towards Diane's block of flats. He said the pair had then gone into the laundry area of Diane's block of flats and had briefly kissed and cuddled, before James said he then climbed over the wall at the back of the block of flats and made his way home. However, after only a short time, and now seeming to be very anxious, James Mulliday finally disclosed the truth about what happened in the ground floor laundry area that fateful night. He said that when he had gone to Diane to give her a kiss, she had pushed him away, laughed and said he smelled, with James telling detectives that it was my feet. I have awfully smelly feet, and she said I was stinking. Feeling slighted by being mocked, he said he then pushed Diane back and she'd fallen down. Now this next bit doesn't quite make sense to me. Apparently James had then said that he wasn't sure what had happened next, but as he looked down at Diane on the floor, he realised that she was dead, but that the fact Diane was dead had been a terrible accident. I took it that when he said he wasn't sure what followed, he meant he couldn't remember attacking Diane, strangling her, burning her, and removing her clothes. But then he went on to say that her death had been the result of a terrible accident. So he doesn't know what happened, but he knows enough to know it was a terrible accident? That confused me. Remember, this is all coming from the Law Killer's book, not the newspaper articles yet. So, James then admitted that he had stolen Diane's boots, handbag and her gloves, saying that he took everything shiny because he thought that they might have his fingerprints on them. Now, you'll remember the match burns that had been on Diane's body. Well, James explained this by saying that he had lit the matches to locate the items that he was removing from Diane's body, and presumably he had burnt Diane in that process. And so, happy with this confession, the police then accompanied James to a drain near Pitalpin Court where he had hidden the boots and bag he had taken from Diane. And apparently a metal comb that had been in Diane's handbag that had her name scratched on it was found under James's mattress when his home was searched. 17-year-old James Mulliday was charged with Diane's murder and briefly appeared in court on Tuesday the 9th of March, where he was officially charged with Diane's murder and committed for further examination. On the 22nd of April 1971, 17-year-old James Mulliday appeared in the High Court in Edinburgh for no more than 2 minutes, where he pleaded guilty to the murder of 16-year-old Diane Graham, with the judge saying that he had no option with regard to his sentence. Annoyingly though, I couldn't find anywhere what his sentence had actually been, as both newspapers from back then and the Law Killer's book only said that he was ordered to be detained during Her Majesty's pleasure, and that this was apparently the equivalent of a life sentence for someone his age. Diane's mum Moira and stepdad Alexander were devastated by Diane's murder. And despite both returning to work shortly after the sentencing, Diane's mum was said to still be in utter shock and under doctor's orders. Diane's mum Moira was rushed to hospital in early June, 3 months after Diane's murder, but sadly Moira died, many saying that it was due to the shock of her beloved daughter Diane being taken from her that had killed her. Her husband Alexander wasn't there when his wife died, as he was attending a course for the post office in Birmingham in England at the time. He had lost everything, and I couldn't find out what happened to Alexander after this, but I hope he got the support he needed. Oh yes, I was going to tell you what the paper said happened to Diane after her post-mortem, as opposed to what was disclosed in the Law Killer's book, so here goes. Keep in mind, though, that Chief Inspector David Fotheringham felt considerable compassion for Diane's murderer after he assaulted Diane, compressed her throat with his hands, stripped her, compressed her throat with a ligature, burnt her on the breasts and private parts with matches, and that he did murder her. Do you feel considerable compassion for Diane's murderer? Diane was 16 years old, had just had a fantastic night out dancing, had made it almost all the way home. Thanks for listening to another episode of Scottish Murders. If this case has captivated you, then don't forget to tell a friend to listen or check out scottishmurders.com so together we can share more Scottish Murders. Join me next week for a Scotland Then episode from 1971, and you'll not believe just how many murders there were around the time of Diane's murder. So, until then, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.